Hey, everybody, welcome back to Breakfast with Bobby. Good morning. I hope that your Monday is off to a great start. And I am here, of course, with my co host, Bobby Clabino. I am Christina Bloom, and we are back with our friend Marcus. And boy, it sounds like it's going to be a fun show today. So, hey, how y'all doing?
So just to brief you all, in case you don't know who Marcus Kasunich is, he is a holistic life and relationship coach. He's a keynote speaker, an author, a spiritual teacher, and has accumulated more than 40,000 hours. I'm pretty sure you're rounding out like 50 by now, aren't you? Just based on all the time you spent with me, I'm thinking that it's out there.
Yeah.
I need coaching, more coaching. Hours of coaching and individuals, entrepreneurs, couples, families, businesses, and over 20 years of practice. He facilitates in person and online courses, events, retreats, and workshops, integrates the most powerful aspects of the practical life of coaching, psychology, alternative modalities, awareness, building tools, and meditation practices from different traditions. Marcus empowers you to create lasting change in every area of your life by transforming all of your relationships from the inside out. Practically speaking, I have been a participant in your IRAM class for a very long time, and it literally has changed my life. And one of the things that I recall you saying is struggle is a choice. And I really had to think about that because I think some of us, and I do it all the time, I'm much of a down and dirty kind of workhorse sort of thing, put your nose to the grindstone. And if I'm not working hard, I just kind of feel like I'm undeserved of happiness or whatever. So I kind of have to work for it. And then you refreshed my senses and said, you don't really have to struggle, Bobby. You can make a different choice to not struggle and be happy. I'm hoping that you can elaborate on that because I have chosen not to struggle. And I'm so much happier about that. Life is better.
Okay, yeah, I can talk about that. I think this is a big thing in the spiritual world, and I think it's really, I think a lot of it's left over from unconscious conditioning that we have from religion, from different systems, from different ideas that have kind of embedded themselves in the subconscious, and then this is how we approach life. But first of all, when we use the word struggle, a lot of people, like, if you really want to define it, it's interesting. If you look at the definition of it, it means make forceful or violent efforts to get free of restraint, constriction, difficulties, or opposition, right? So, the word struggle is a forceful, violent resistance to what is. So a lot of people are like, well, like, because Nietzsche coined this term, to live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. I never liked that quote because for me, to live is not to suffer. To simply, I would rephrase the quote. I would say to simply survive is suffering, but to truly live is to find meaning in the suffering until you transcend the suffering and no longer require needless suffering to remember how to live.
That just
So
rolls right off the tongue. I'm just,
I could say it again, but
you know, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
I do that all the
you
time.
all, you two were warned when we started this. This is my mood right now. You two were warned.
it's all good.
Yeah, to live is to flow,
Struggling.
you
To live is
know?
to flow, exactly. It's
Yeah,
to be in the acceptance and the fluidity of what life's offering, not in the forceful and violent resistance to it.
right.
So when people glorify struggling, they're glorifying a resistance to what is on a very subconscious level. And I when I work with people, I have to spend a lot of time. One of the first things I like to do is like start to have them start to unravel their unconscious relationship to this idea of needing to struggle in order to make it or in order to have a relationship or in order to grow. Because if you look at the definition, any forceful or violent effort towards anything is out of alignment with love, as you
Right.
put it, Christina. Like so yes, I when I talk about that, then it's a choice on some level that we're choosing to align with an unconscious conditioning that maybe we've never really examined, right? We never
Right.
examined whether that's actually healthy. Just because we've always done it and it's comfortable and it's familiar doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually serving us to grow in a very effective, fluid, organic, conscious way. So I that's why I say suffering is a choice for a lot of people. It's maybe an unconscious choice. It's what they've always done or what they've always had as an example, but it's not necessarily the highest form of aligning your essence to what is in consciousness and in life and in relationships for that matter,
Right.
right? How
Right.
many times have we stayed in relationships longer than we should have out of the belief that we need to make it work,
I don't know what you're talking about.
right?
33 years.
Years for
Yeah.
many of us. I mean, there's not one of us on the call who can go, no, I've always gotten out when I've hit that place. Most of the time, it takes a lot, and unfortunately, for most people, change requires us to become really, really uncomfortable. Most people don't change until they're very uncomfortable. But a lot of people say uncomfortable and suffering are the same thing, and it's not the same thing. Right? Discomfort is not necessarily the same thing as a struggle because struggle is that is a violent resistance to, and
Hmm.
discomfort just means something that is not aligned and comfortable. That doesn't mean you have to have a violent resistance to it.
Right.
So
Doesn't
I mean,
yeah,
I mean, I mean, if we think about this in terms of martial arts, let's ask our resident martial artists. I mean, what do you do in martial arts? Don't you move in the direction of the thrust? Isn't that a philosophy of martial arts? Like you become mutable and flexible to the face of force. You don't go in resistance to it, right?
right. Yeah. When we are sparring, we are going with the flow. We're watching the person that is trying to attack us and moving out of the way and moving towards them. We're not, it's a flow. It's a flow back and forth motion of just reading the other person
Hmm.
and
So
then
it's
going,
it's
yeah, going
it's
with the
not
flow.
it's not a violent opposition to,
No, no, not unless you're trying to do something different, which we try not to do.
right?
We
Because it's
certainly
not
don't hurt
the
anybody.
so in that sense, I mean, I think if we look at that in terms of growth, then if we're trying to struggle through something and push through it in that way, we're kind of violently trying to forcefully get out of something or forcefully in resistance to it. That is not the optimal way of growth. And I think most people live like that in a way that they're not even aware
Right.
of that that's the way they're living, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I
that
think that's
happens a
what they have
lot.
to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I went to Catholic school and I remember the nuns. Part of their part of their daily routine was to suffer. You know, they weren't going to get to heaven unless they suffered X amount of years or days or, and said the rosary and all kinds of stuff. But suffering was part of their career, so to speak.
It is for Native American too. That's been part of their culture for a long time. You have to suffer to get reward. And that is the one part of my culture I do not agree with.
I
It's,
I second that. Being
yeah.
coming from a native background as well, that
Hmm.
idea of suffering. I mean,
Hmm.
and the definition of suffering is interesting too, because if you look it up, it means to tolerate the experience you're being subjected to. So
Right.
usually something bad or unpleasant. But if you think about tolerating something, it's not the same as accepting it, right? Tolerating it means I'm going to put up with it till it goes away, but it's always a temporary thing. When
Right.
you accept a situation, then you have the ability to change it. If you're just tolerating and putting up with it, then you're managing it, and managing is a kind of control. So, I mean, suffering is all really, in some ways, the whole idea to tolerate something is kind of to manage it, which is a form of controlling it rather than being back in that sense of being in flow with it.
Right.
So where do you work on transcendence then in that respect?
Well, I think that the first thing is that, I mean, the very first thing when we look at this concept of suffering or struggle is that you really have to kind of deconstruct your relationship to it, because most people haven't examined their relationship to struggle. And I'm telling you, for me, on my spiritual path and my training, when I really started to examine the unconscious conditioning that I had around struggle and around about suffering and around and glorification of it, like, because that is a very much a leftover unconscious conditioned thing from religion. I mean, listen, first of all, a lot of people will argue with me, but the West is predominantly latent in Christianity. I mean, we have "In God We Trust" on our dollar, like "God Bless America." That's a Christian nation. I mean, it may not be the mosaic of what's out there, because I come, like Christina, I come from a native background which is not Christian. But I mean, I've but the philosophy of America is latent in this idea of suffering as a noble act in order to get closer to God. The whole iconography of Christianity is a suffering, a martyr, a suffering Christ on a cross. That's what's in every church, right? Which, I
Right.
mean, for a Native American, when you look at that, we would look at that and go, why are we putting a dead man on a cross and glorifying that as the way we should move forward? I mean, isn't that not a unconscious glorification that somehow you have to suffer in order to get your just rewards? And you don't necessarily get them in this lifetime.
Right.
You get them on the other side
Yeah,
Maybe.
if you're good enough,
if you're
Yeah.
good
if you've
enough.
suffered enough, if you're, if you've put up with enough abuse and enough whatever, then yeah, then you get your reward on the other side. And I was raised in a Christian home. We're using that term loosely.
Yeah, we're using
Um,
that too loosely.
yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, the whole thing was, spare the rod, spoil the child,
Mm.
suffering, not only just receiving suffering, but inflicting suffering on other people. I mean, it's like, um,
Yeah.
somehow, I don't know. That's not a God I'm interested in, but thanks anyway.
Right.
know?
Well, that's another whole discussion.
Well,
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
is a whole discussion, but it does feed into what we're talking about
Yeah.
because it is
totally.
part of our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's forgotten. I mean, the 13 colonies were populated by the Puritans. Like, the Puritans were like heavy God-fearing, that word God-fearing
Hmm.
Christians who were deeply, deeply devoted to this idea of sin and suffering and sacrifice. They all kind of work together. I mean,
Hmm.
and it's mind-blowing to me because the concept of sacrifice is usually related to suffering, but it doesn't mean anything about suffering. The
No.
word sacrifice literally means, in Latin, it means to make sacred. And in Hebrew, it means to draw near. So it has nothing to do with giving up. It doesn't have to do with struggle. It's offering something. And I mean, if you want to really take that on a psychological level, when you offer something to the divine, what you're saying is you're like letting go of your ego attachment to it, and you're offering it to a higher aspect of your being. So if you take the word sacrifice and you relate it, it has nothing to do with struggle or suffering. It has to do with making a sacrament, an offering to something higher within you. Or if you see that as a universal deity, or universe, or God, or however you perceive that, but it doesn't have to do with suffering. So I mean, the fact that that's all got translated: suffering, sin, sacrifice. I mean, even the word sin is an archery term, which just means miss the mark. Who do you know that's picked up a bow, taken a shot, and automatically every single time hits the bullseye? No, you make an error and you refine the error. There's nothing in that says the concept of sin means that you're wrong, you're bad, and you have to prove that you have to earn being good enough in order to deserve the love of the divine. I mean, that's all in our culture.
That's so weird because I always think of sin as an acronym.
Oh, what do you?
Self-imposed nonsense.
Oh, that's
That's
nice. I like that. I like
that
that a lot.
that's the way it makes sense to me because
Right.
I mean it's even in even in our media, like our entertainment, there are some movies that I've seen over the years or whatever that like you're a sinful person. Well, what does that mean? That means that I did something you don't agree with.
Right. And now you have to earn your love back.
Yeah,
Right. So I
right.
think I think I mean, I know it's a bigger discussion, but I think all of that is layered in the unconscious of us. And so that's, even if we're not aware of it, it's in our language, it's in our culture, it's in the way we think. And so I feel a part of transcending that is first to go in there and look at what you actually believe around it. Because how can a lot of people try to change without looking what their actual beliefs are? And so it's kind of like layering. It's like going to the shoe store, not taking off your old shoes and putting a new pair of shoes on top. Like you have to take the old off and let go of the old and then replace it with something that's more in alignment with something that's part of the flow, part of consciousness, part of something that's expansive, which is
That's
why I
awesome.
like
I'm going to
using
use that. I'm going to use that
the
shoe
shoe thing. Well,
analogy.
I would use
Thank
the
you.
sin thing. Trust me.
I like that too. The word sin means you just missed the mark. It doesn't mean that
Yeah,
you're unworthy of anything. It just means that you
Yeah.
missed.
But see, that's what I'm saying in terms of like a culture that is predominantly Christian, because those values are still unconsciously there from the root of when America was settled. And I mean, it's interesting. When I went to Denmark and I was talking to an individual who lived there for most of his life, and then we went to visit Amsterdam, and I said, "My God, Amsterdam is so different than the rest of the rural Denmark." And he said to me, "Well, that's because Amsterdam," he said, is a reaction to Calvinism." And I said, "Calvinism?" And he's like, "Oh, Calvinism is this heavy Puritan culture. It's very, very conservative, and you believe in hard work and you get your just rewards on the other side." And he said the intense repression of that kind of thought process that's latent in the culture required something to in resistance to it. Amsterdam, which was completely the opposite of everything, drugs, alcohol, prostitution, like the extreme of the other side, was a reaction to that experience. Did we lose her for a second?
It appears that we did. It looks like she's offline a little bit. She must have.
I'm fine. I just took myself out of the picture for a minute. I'm listening and I'm still recording.
Okay.
Hey, great.
So
So,
when we go ahead, go ahead.
well, I was going to just mention, so all of this heavy, archaic kind of um, things that we've learned to behave, all that is out of keeping you in control of making sure that life goes the way that, the leadership wants it to go. Because if you're not paying attention to what's going on and you are misbehaving, you've clearly sinned and missed the mark. And all of that it's just about, like Christina said, it's just a bunch of nonsense. And it's really all about keeping people controlled for the outcome that they want.
Right.
And over
And that's
time, we learn to control ourselves in the way that we have been taught to be controlled.
Right.
exactly.
Hmm.
So that's why I say when I work with people, I'm like, let's deconstruct, let's get really honest and deconstruct what your personal relationship is with that. Because until you understand it, how do you know what tools to work with to shift it? Right. So a lot of people will just say, I deny suffering. I'm like, but you don't, because on some unconscious level, it's still wired in. So
Yeah.
first of all, look at it, understand it, examine it, get really honest and clear about it. And then from that perspective, once you have a good picture of what's going on inside of you, what your personal belief is around it, and what your family's belief was, because you're going to probably embody a lot of the conditioning of what your family's beliefs around struggling were, and the concept of suffering. Especially if it was turned into a noble act to justify that you need to earn something to be a good person, when you start to unravel that, then you got to look at that and go, how am I applying that to my spiritual world, to my relationships, to my manifestation abilities, to what I'm creating in the world? Because if that's latent underneath of you and you're trying to manifest in the world, don't you think that you'll have to have struggle in order to gain and give yourself permission to actually acquire anything, whether that be monetary, spiritual, or anything else? So the part of transcending it is really getting in the nitty gritty of something to understand what you believe. And I mean, there's what you want to believe and what you actually believe, right? There's a lot of people, yeah, but I want to believe that. I'm like, that's cool that you want to believe that. And that's the ideal that you want to put your energy towards. But you still have to understand what you're working with if you want to be able to get to point A to point B. And that's why I always say it's like a GPS system. Like when you're going somewhere, say we're going from LA to Las Vegas, right? And you put in your GPS where you want to go, right? You don't get the ideal, most effective route from point A to point B till you put in your present location. So
Hmm.
when it comes to spiritual growth, you have to understand where you're working from in order to understand the tools you need to do to get to where you want to go. So for me, if you don't put in the starting point, then it's just a wish. It's a hope. It's an ideal that will you be able to manifest it? Not if you don't put in a point A and a point B. Then the route magically starts to kind of show itself And that's the same thing that happens in consciousness. When you put in those 2 points, you get clear on where you are, you understand where you want to go, then consciousness starts to demonstrate, the universe starts to offer invitations to make that most effective, efficient, graceful path to get you from point A to point B. So
Can we
that's
talk
why,
about the path for a minute?
sure, let's talk about the path.
Okay, because in my working with people, what I have discovered over the years is that when people do that, when they finally decide, okay, this is where I'm at, that's where I want to be, I'm making the decision to stop believing what I'm believing now, to process through that so that I can get a starting point. All of a sudden, people seem to want to already be at the location. Like let's talk about the path, let's talk about the journey, because that's an important step in it. And I wouldn't expect to leave my driveway and drive to where you are in Sedona and expect the scenery to all look like Sedona as soon as I pull out of my garage. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So, but a lot of people kind of miss those steps in between. So, can we just briefly address that?
There, first of all, that's yes. A lot of people, as soon as they identify where they want to go, they think they should be there,
Yes.
right? And so that's the wishful, hopeful thinking
Right.
that's not really attached to pragmatic reality.
Yeah. And none of us have perfected the transporter as far as I know. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
And so where what happens during the journey, that's the refinement.
Yeah.
That's where you refine all of the things you think you believe versus what you actually believe. And you start getting opportunities and invitations to challenge your notion of your old beliefs. The journey is that whole process of unraveling that so that you can get to the destination, the hopeful destination that you projected. But without that journey, there, and which is experience, right? That's direct experience. That and a combination for me, integration always happens with direct experience, which is something that is direct and something you feel, that's something that's happening, and a cognitive understanding of that direct experience. When you put those two things together, that's what integration begins to happen and shift happens. So, I mean, I had a teacher recently say to me, enlightenment is as much about understanding as it is about the direct experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could have the direct experience and not have the words and the understanding for it, and maybe never give yourself permission to believe that you're actually where you are because you don't cognitively understand what's happened. And so,
Context.
context, right?
Context. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So that journey is the unraveling, it's the discovery, it's the direct experience, it's the attainment of understanding as you're going along, it's the letting go of all the things you don't need, it's the accumulation of the tools that are actually serving you. Without that process, without the drive from point A to point B, you never really get to point B. And a lot of people, that's a kind of spiritual bypass that people will think just because they can see it and they know the destination and they may understand it and they may not have experienced it, they somehow know and have integrated it, which is totally false,
Right.
right?
There has to be a grieving in there. There has to be a coming to terms with, this is what I was taught, this is what I've always believed, this is what has been integrated into my consciousness and into my subconsciousness. But letting go of that stuff, there's a grieving process. It's like when you quit drink, when an alcoholic quits drinking, they have to grieve the alcohol, right? They have to grieve what it used to do for them in order for them to stay sober and move on. It's kind of the same process in my mind. I don't know if
It
that
is.
works for you, but
No, no, totally. It's the same process. And that's not necessarily comfortable, but
no.
it is expansive,
Hmm.
right? So it's necessary. So that's where like it's not comfortable, but it doesn't have to be and there is struggle but you can lean into that and you can
Hmm.
accept that. And if you accept it, the process of letting go happens so much more quickly. I mean, in Buddhism, they talk about the whole concept of suffering, right? And they call it dukkha, and dukkha has like three elements to it. It's like physical and mental pain. There's the distress of the impermanence of our life, and
Hmm.
then there's the existential suffering of being a human being. And they said the root of all of that comes from clinging, grasping, and trying to attach to something. So the letting go of attachment is the freedom that comes to let go of suffering. So you will suffer until you let go of your perceived attachments to something. And that's the grieving process that you're talking about. Because when you do let go, when you break that attachment, there has to be a sadness, a mourning, and a suffering for the version of you thought you were,
That's
right?
exactly what it is. Yes. You're not grieving necessarily, like in the example I used, you're not necessarily grieving the example, the alcohol. You're more grieving who you thought you were when you were using alcohol, because I thought I was the life of the party. Turns out that was not the case. I'm just saying. Something, it's that coming to terms with who am I really in this starting point, you
Which is
know?
really the dispelling of an illusion that
Mm-hmm.
we've bought into, which
Right,
is
exactly.
no different than any concept or idea or belief, which is why part of transcending that whole idea of suffering means you have to examine who you thought you were and ask yourself, is this real? Is this
Yeah.
real, or is this just my attachment to the identity of who I am? I mean, the spiritual process is a constant unraveling of your perceived idea of who you are.
Right.
I had a teacher who used to say, I'm going to keep taking the tiles away from you that you're standing on until there's nothing left. And when there's nothing left, you'll dissolve into what you really are. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
understand, if you're not mourning it, then you're not really truly honoring the fact that you had that real deep attachment to something.
And the
That's why we
experiences that came with it, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, because there was growth and there was learning
Yeah.
about, and I mean, the fact, and then a lot of people are so distraught with of the loss that they're forgetting if you're letting go of it and and the opportunities are being presented for you to let go of it means it doesn't serve you anymore,
Right.
right? Or
Right.
didn't
But you can
serve the
still
ver
remember the good times. You know what I'm saying?
absolutely,
That's that.
absolutely.
And I think we are so caught in black and white thinking. Like, that was bad. What I'm moving to is good. And that's all there is to it. And there is no black and white thinking there, because every experience is just that, an experience.
Well,
And that
the other,
experience is offering that invitation for some kind of assessment, some kind of understanding, some
Yeah,
kind of learning, some kind of evolvement.
absolutely. Bobby, what were you going to say?
it takes time to do all of this.
It
And so
does.
when people get in the car and think that they should be there now,
Yeah.
they tend to give up because it takes a while to get to where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
And they underestimate the amount of work and effort and consciousness it takes to get into that situation in the first place to get to the end result of growth.
Right.
And
And you
most
still have to
people,
stop and fuel up, right? I mean, you still
oh,
have to
yeah,
stop and put
right.
gas in the car. So there's
Oh,
breaks
yeah,
involved in that. And that's all part of the journey too, that I think that we don't necessarily understand when we're starting out.
right. You should
Well,
be there.
we have such a culture of instant gratification.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
listen, you can get information instantly by Googling it. Before there was a internet and a Google, you had to go to the library to research something, right? You had to drive your bike to, I know I had to drive my bike
Yeah.
to the island, get to the Dewey Decimal System, pull out the card catalog, look at the book, find it.
Yeah.
There was a whole journey to find the
Right.
information. Whereas now, instant gratification, food delivered to your house, information immediately when you want it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that belief, that's also a conditioned belief. So if you think about that, we have the conditioned belief of struggle unconsciously from our history and from our culture. Then we have this new conditioned belief of instant gratification. Those two things create such a chaos in the consciousness because you're either attached to getting it immediately or you feel like you have to grind in order to deserve it. And you put those two things together, and that gets in the way of growth.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
absolutely does. Right. And it's amazing how much, like, we need to release struggle, or maybe we want to release struggle is a better way to say it, because some people really enjoy the struggle. I'm just going to put that out
Oh,
there.
they do. They do.
Some people revel in the struggle, and okay, that's good for you. Have a nice life. I'll see you. We'll see you when I see ya. But there's, when we want to release a struggle, there's so much not understanding of what's involved in the process. And the first part of the process is making a decision, right? I don't want to live this way. That's the first thing. You make the
That's a
decision.
recognition, right? The
It's a
recognition of
recognition.
it's not
Yes,
working.
exactly. This isn't working. So I want to have that. And maybe that, instead of being, 100 miles away, is 1,000 miles away. Well, that's a little bit longer journey, and you still have to, if you're going to, let's say, move, you have to go through all your stuff, release what you don't want to drag with you, pack up what you do want to drag with you. There's that whole process involved right from the beginning, and as Bobby said, that's why it takes time. There's a lot
Yeah,
involved in it. It's not just waking up one day and going, oh, I want a completely different life. And okay, well, that's the beginning, but you still have all of this other stuff to release, to embrace, to make decisions about all along the line. And that's what I hear when I hear you talking, Marcus.
that's what I'm. That's exactly. We're on the same page with that. I agree with you
Yeah.
100%. I
I
mean,
kind
having
of
just
break it
moved.
down for the newbies, but
Well, Bobby, you used another term, another word that I think is valuable to discuss. It's effort, right?
effort. Yeah.
Because I mean, in the spiritual journey of kind of like realization, they talk about effort versus effortlessness, and it takes effort to get to the place where you recognize you don't need effort,
Right.
right? So effortlessness only comes after you've explored effort, which is the paradox. Like they're like, well, if effortlessness is the goal or the state, the ideal state, then why do I need effort to get there? But you need effort to realize you don't need effort. And then that's that whole paradox, which is and paradox is an interesting thing because paradox cannot be understood with the mind. It is when you enter any spiritual paradox in your life, the only way to really absorb that paradox is to deepen into the heart and experience the paradox from a non-dualistic, non-linear, non-rational place. It's a different kind of spiritual rationality. It's not a mental understanding. It's something that transcends that. And so when we hit these spaces of paradox that challenge us into this idea of effort and what effortlessness or struggle and non-struggle, we have to move to an altered, a higher version of ourselves, a deeper state within, in order to be able to be in acceptance of it, which is part of the journey of unraveling your attachment to how you think things should be. So effort is required. To get to effortlessness, effort is required. And to understand you don't need struggle, you probably had to struggle, right?
Well,
Right.
You
yeah, you have
probably
to
did.
ask yourself, why am I doing this?
Yeah,
Right.
the question is are you going to continue to do it? That's
Right.
it's not that you did it once. The question is once you've learned that you don't need to do anymore, that's where it's like, wait a second, I don't need to keep doing that thing because it's not expansive. It doesn't feel in alignment. And the new version of me doesn't need that anymore.
Right.
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 And the
I-
flow. Remember, we were talking about martial arts and sparring and being in the flow. It's the same thing. You have to be in the flow. First of all, the effort to get in the flow, to realize you don't need any very much effort to get out of it. You still need to exercise the effort into the flow so that you can relax and understand where to go from there. And the
Yeah.
more you're in the flow, the easier it gets.
That's right. So
Hmm.
once you've got a direct experience of what the flow feels like, it's easier to get back into the flow. It doesn't require as much effort to
Right.
get back into that state, right? Which is why we do sadhana and spiritual practices, because the more we practice, the easier it is to drop into deeper states of consciousness or to get into the flow or to let go of and accept what is rather than push against it and grasp. And I mean, all of the grasping is egoic, anyways. It's all something we've decided with the little version of our minds and to that we think we need, and ultimately the universe will demonstrate whether we actually do or not.
Right.
Right. And when you are not in the flow, you know when you're not in the flow and you want to get back into it.
And
And now
and you
you
can't
come
do
back.
that without direct experience. If you've never been in the flow, you don't know what it feels like, right?
Right.
If you've never been on the drive between Wisconsin and Sedona, you don't know what it's like to take the journey. And this is what I mean, that's why people are like this instant gratification on Instagram and TikTok, and you think you can get it with a couple of lines, is the starting point of recognition. Once you recognize, then you go into the process, and that's where the magic is, the process, right?
Right.
The process, the journey is the success. The journey is what gives you all of that stuff. It's not necessarily the destination, because as soon as you get to the destination, there's going to be another journey to somewhere else.
Right. And can I just say, using that analogy of driving from Wisconsin to Sedona, because I've done it, there's a whole lot of flat Kansas in between, right? So you you have to go through,
You do.
on the spiritual journey, there's going to be some boredom, and I think that's where people get
Yeah,
lost.
that's
Oh,
true.
People
that's a
get
good point.
lost in the boredom because that beginning point with all of the struggle and all of the not being in flow. There's a lot of drama around that, and drama brings excitement. And then you hit Kansas, and all you got is corn and wheat fields and flat for miles and miles and hours, right? So that's a great analogy, though, because there
It is.
is that bringing down of that. It's excitement isn't the word I'm looking for, but bringing down the drama, bringing down the adrenaline, bringing down all of that, and getting into a peaceful state where you can just go, oh, look, more corn. Oh,
Well,
I
here's,
think that's a bean field over there. It's, but it's a great analogy though,
oh,
because
it
there
is.
is that part of the journey that is not exciting. It
Yeah.
does not look like your destination. And
And
then
you
like
need it. You
yes,
absolutely need
you
it.
absolutely need it. Those are the places where you learn to meditate. Those are the places where you just learn to be and not need external stimuli to get you through to the next big, you know what I'm saying? So,
Right.
but what a lot of people also don't understand is that once you've reached that destination, you go, this is beautiful. I love this. Where to next? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like because that next destination is beckoning. And so,
Well, it's
yeah.
interesting because when I first experienced peace, because my quest in my 20s was all about peace. And I remember feeling this sense of peace. I was totally bored by it.
Hmm.
I had this
Yeah.
experience of peace, and I'm like, where's the burning bush? Where's the excitement? Where's the drama? And then when you start to deepen in the
Hmm.
experience of peace, you recognize that it's this alive sense of nothing. And when I mean nothing, I mean there's nothing there, which means unlimited potential is available, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of people when they hear, because consciousness is really broken down into the state of nothingness and the state of action, Shiva and Shakti, in
Hmm.
when we look at like ancient scriptures. But and a lot of people think nothing means a void, but it what that when you take away everything, there's infinite potential available. So
Right.
Right.
peace is that act of a live sense of infinite potential that's not dramatic in the way the ego sees it as dramatic.
Right.
So
Or in the
a
way
lot
our
of people
conditioning even sees
are,
it.
and we are
Yeah.
so conditioned to
Yeah.
be desensitized to that state of active nothingness to the point where drama is how we function, which is why we have this experience where you have to have such a huge, massive Mack truck of experiences in order for people to change because we're so desensitized and we're not recognizing and appreciating the boredom, the space of beingness because there's
Yes.
nothing going on the way that drama looks at.
Right.
So yeah, we need the cornfields. And I'm laughing because I've done the drive, so I
Uh-huh.
know exactly what you're talking about.
Because we got Kansas and Nebraska. Have fun,
Nebraska, oh
buddy.
my God,
Gosh. Yeah.
Nebraska.
Nebraska. I drive through Nebraska at night or in the dark if I possibly can because there's literally nothing to see.
Yeah, it was that was an interesting part of the drive. My when my wife and I did it, we were like,
Hmm.
my God, Nebraska, wow, like
Yeah.
yeah. But it was,
No,
but
no
that's
disrespect to
no
Nebraska. I'm
disrespect.
just saying.
No, just it's
It's a
but
great
that's where
state.
but you said it well. That's where reflection happens.
Hmm.
That's where you sink into beingness happens. That's where you appreciate a sense of potential and openness.
Hmm.
That's where beingness lives, and that's why it's so hard for people to be because there's so much. We put so many things on being, but being requires it's simple. There's a simplicity to it that
Hmm.
defies all of this drama that we have going on. And I mean, our world does not in any way, shape, or form endorse beingness.
No.
It
Right.
doesn't, right?
There's
It
plenty to
endorses
do.
activity, it endorses conflict, it endorses struggle, and it endorses drama.
And
Yeah.
it endorses not ever being good enough.
Mm.
Just look at our Look at the beauty industry, for example.
That's
Look at the
true.
clothing industry, for example. Those industries thrive on people who are not at peace with themselves.
That's where that resistance and grasping gets into dukkha, which is where struggle gets happening. So I
Yeah,
mean, that ultimately creates more struggle, not less struggle,
right,
right? And
right.
there's and what's the quote? There's a quote that Buddhists use. They talk about desire. They say when we desire something, it never lasts and it's never satisfying,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's always a
Right,
grasping in desire for something more. And so that simplicity of just letting go and being it transcends struggle. That transcends struggle, but it takes struggle for you to let go of the ideas in order to get into that
right.
state. But once you've touched it and you've tasted it again and again and again and again, you recognize that's where the magic is happening,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's a deeper, more rich experience of your own essence of who you are as a being.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes, and that, like you said, Bobby, that takes time and effort, understanding and direct experience in order to have enough of that integrated in you where you can sit and live and be in it as an active way of living. And that
Right.
changes the
Yeah,
game. When you're looking through the eyes of emptiness, the eyes of emptiness are looking through you, which is the infinite potential of what is resting in the beingness of your consciousness. That is a different relationship to reality than living in the chaos of the superficial struggle and drama.
Right. Well, they
right.
want to keep you there so that you're not thinking about yourself. You're just spinning around doing nothing, and you're not getting anywhere, and you're not satisfied, and you're moving further and further away from yourself.
Right. And in doing so, you're trying to look better and better and better for other people. I don't know. I don't know where that is,
Superficial.
but it's all superficial. Yeah, exactly.
It's all outer, but it's all outer
Mm-hmm.
focused, right? It's getting affirmation from a source in the outside that doesn't have any relationship with that inner peace and inner connection. So even the affirmation you're getting is based in the struggle, the drama, the not good enough, that you have to earn it, you have to become better. I mean, that will never lead to any kind of fulfillment,
Nope.
Agreed.
right? It
Yep.
Agreed.
just doesn't. So when we talk about transcending this whole idea of struggle, it requires us to kind of unravel, to understand, and then it takes effort and it takes what I would call empowered action towards what you want, which is informed by a knowing and an understanding that you're not wanting what you have. And
Right.
the old version of you can no longer, the new version of you can no longer function the way you used to. And
Right.
that's that mourning. That's where everything breaks. I mean, I often describe sadness. It's a powerful state of sadness is such a beautiful, powerful, expansive emotion. And a lot of people go, yeah, but it's really uncomfortable. But I'm like, yes, it is, because it's the breaking of attachment. You're breaking attachment and there's a release. Sadness is the release. It's like the valve releasing all of that. And so sadness is this very, very, very powerful, expansive state. And yet, if you talk to people are in resistance to sadness because it's uncomfortable,
Right.
Or
Tell
you're
me about
told it's not okay to be sad.
or you're
You
conditioned to
know,
say that state is not okay, and it's
yeah,
highly expansive, because
right.
without
It's
that release we don't get to mourn, which means we can't move forward.
right. And if you even looking at, breaking it down to our modern society, if someone very important to you leaves this planet, leaves their body behind and dies, well, corporate America says you have 3 days to mourn that person.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, 3 days. No, I mean, it doesn't even hit you in the first 3 days,
No,
right?
you're in
So
shock.
you're in shock. So, it's that 3 days of shock before you have to just go boom, back, nose to the grindstone. Let's get this done. You're through the shock. You're fine. Ignore it now. And ignoring our mourning, ignoring our grief, ignoring our sadness rather than delving into it, because the thing is that a lot of people don't understand is that if you just embrace it and then let it move through you, it moves through you so much faster than when you try to resist it.
Yeah, that's called going with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
It is going with the
Exactly. It
flow.
is going with the
Yeah.
flow. Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
being in.
a lot of people ask me, well, how do you move through emotional turmoil? And I always say, stay with whatever emotion viscerally in your body. A lot of people, what they end up doing when they have an emotional experience is they immediately go into their mind and they build a story. So you're
Yep.
not really processing the emotional
Mm-hmm.
side. You're just building a story, and then they spin in the story and they think the ego, this is an egoic act, right? On the superficial level, you're on the surface of the ocean, you're spinning in a story, but you're not ever deepening into the state or the experience of what that emotion, that visceral direct experience in your body. The only way to process emotion is to feel it to its completion. And the longer
Yeah.
you're with it and you stay available to it, the quicker it goes. And
Right.
a lot of people, when I work with them, are like, yeah, but isn't there a faster way? I'm like, that is the fast
That
way.
is the faster
That is
way.
the faster
Exactly.
way.
Exactly. That is the faster way, people.
Right.
You
Because if you
just got
stay
to
in
be
the,
willing to be uncomfortable with it for a bit.
And that's where
Yeah.
discomfort is not the same as struggle, right?
Right.
Because that form of discomfort, which just really means being available to something that's not ideal, is necessary as part of the process of unraveling.
Mm-hmm.
So, struggle is not the same as discomfort. And the idea of struggle and discomfort, that's why people get, and you know what, you have to mature spiritually to understand the difference between something that's contractive, which means it shuts down, it closes off, it doesn't serve you, it's tight, versus discomfort. Discomfort means it may be uncomfortable, and that discomfort is required in order to you transcend to something new in your consciousness, in your belief system, in your relationships, whatever. Were
Right.
you going to say something, Bobby?
yeah, staying in the story is all about struggle. You continue to struggle and you continue to suffer. So the longer you stay in the story, the more you suffer about it. So staying in the flow, getting it over with, pondering on it and just getting over with it, it'll go through your body a lot quicker. Don't stay in the story.
No, and that's why I always say, people say to me when they're going through their emotional states, and I'm working with someone in an emotional state, I'm like, deny the ego the story and just stay in the visceral experience of the emotion. And if you can just use your mind to just stay present in the feeling and let the feeling move through you, the feeling will change, because because feelings are like weather. I mean, you step out at 2 o'clock in Wisconsin and then you step out at 6 o'clock, the weather's different.
Yes.
Right.
Very
Yeah.
much so. Yes.
Very much so. So weather is always changing. So the changing, which is a natural state of what is, right? The only
Mhm.
constant in the universe is change. So if you're trying to attach to a story instead of being with the experience, it's going to take you tremendous effort, way more struggle, and a lot more time than if you're just with something and you go in the direction of the thrust and you
Right.
sit with it and you let it have its way with you, because it has something to teach you in the letting go process, which, in your words, Christina, is that journey from one point to the other point, right? That's the
Right.
journey. And that journey will significantly be minimized if you're not in resistance to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about that transcendence of struggle. These are some of the things that, but we have to dissect it. We have to kind of look at it and understand how our psychology is wired into it, how our thought process, how our belief systems are wired into it, because that does make a difference in terms of how we approach it. And sometimes most of the spiritual journey is unlearning. You have to
Mm-hmm.
unlearn all the stuff that doesn't serve you in order to get access to something else that reveals itself when you're kind of out of the way. I remember when I started my journey, I used to say, I had this period of time where I would get on the beach in California when I was living there, and I'd scream to the universe, reveal myself to me, reveal myself to me. And in my immature mind, I thought that meant by commanding it, demanding it, which is powerful because you're using your will and intention to do it. I thought that was going to show me all of these deeper parts of myself. But what it did was it exposed everything that was in the way of what was me, which meant all of the dross, all of the stuff had to come out and get out of the way so that I could reveal what was already there.
Wow. You are so much more mature than I was in my 20s because I
Yeah,
was standing in the middle of a field going, "What the F do you want from me?"
which is not that much different, to be
It's not
honest
that
with you.
much different, but the wording sure was.
Is that the cornfield in Nebraska or
No, it was probably in Wisconsin because we got plenty of those here too.
But but you know something that else that comes up a lot of times when we have this discussion with people, people
Hmm.
talk about, well, I don't want to get, I want comfort. But I want to be comfortable in the process. And I'm like, listen, there's nothing wrong with wanting a physical ease and freedom from pain and constraint, right?
Hmm.
There's nothing wrong with comfort. But when comfort leads to complacency, it becomes that's when you have to get a Mack truck from the universe to change because complacency is that feeling. It's almost a smug feeling or like a satisfaction with yourself, which is an illusion to the
Hmm.
point where you don't even try anymore. And
Right.
so you're so satisfied, you're oversatisfied with your state that you don't feel the need to evolve, to change, and to refine. So complacency is like in direct opposition to evolution, advancement, innovation, refinement, learning, growing. So comfort can sink into complacency. And when you get in complacency, then of course, the invitation from the universe will have to be more intense because you're in resistance to growth, which is the natural state of consciousness.
Hmm.
So I mean, people are like, yeah, comfort is fine, but if comfort leans and sinks into that place of complacency, then it will require pain, struggle, and some kind of thwack from the universe to wake you up because that's not a natural state of being.
Right. Exactly. And comfort can be, if it's here I go again, making an allegory to the physical life, but
That's good.
I,
That's
I
good.
feel like a lot of people get caught in that financial struggle. They get caught in, I don't have time to meditate because I'm working three jobs and raising kids and blah, 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 blah. Because a lot of us have had that story. Okay. Not
Yes.
everybody, but a lot of us have had that story. And once you reach a place where you're not financially struggling as much, then it also leads to a point of, okay, I've gotten where I wanted to go. Now I can just relax, and that's where complacency can set in, and then everything starts falling apart again. you know, because as we're relating it to our actual physical world and being and bringing it out of the etheric to where what does this look like in real life? Because I think that's where a lot of people are. We're going through this whole great awakening on this planet, but we have a lot of people who are still trying to survive in the 3D world while moving into a 5D existence. And that alone it's
Tumultuous.
disorienting. Yeah. Tumultuous, disorienting, whatever words you want to put on it, because it's like, well, I thought once I moved into 5D, everything was going to be rainbows and unicorns, like you said earlier. Yeah. Well, guess what? You're still on planet Earth. You still got to keep a roof over your head. You still got to, those things can get easier as you're more authentically yourself, but they still have to be done unless you're okay with being homeless, in which case, have at
Sure.
it. But because that is a choice too. Because I mean, I have talked to people who are homeless who are like, why would I want all of that responsibility when I'm living free? And a lot of people have those jobs. They're still homeless, but they're choosing that because they don't want to tie themselves to struggle.
Well, I did that
So,
for a year.
mm-hmm,
I chose to go into the mountains of British Columbia and live with just bare minimum survival stuff. I
mm-hmm,
cut up my credit cards. I gave away all my money. I gave away all my possessions. And I had a pack of 70 pounds of stuff, just basic survival gear, 3 or 4 changes of clothes, just the basic necessities. And there is still struggle and survival there too, because
there
you have to
is.
find a campsite, you have to get food, you have to make fire. It's just a different kind of
It's a
thing,
different
right?
kind of struggle, but some people see that as freedom.
And it is to a degree because you're
It
free
is.
from the system, but then you don't get
Yeah,
the benefits of the social engagement of
right.
what the system offers. So there's some, it's a choice. Like
Hmm.
I said at the very beginning, Bobby
Yeah,
started this, it's a
yeah.
struggle is a choice. And that's the flavor of it. But what I realized after a year of doing that is once I got into the flow of it, and it was beautifully beautiful, but it was also intensely confronting because when I was out there alone by myself, you now have to deal with you. There's no
Yeah.
projection. There's nothing in the way. There's no distractions. All of a sudden, you're dealing with all of the conditioning in your mind. All the unconscious stuff comes up. And so, yes, there's this vision of a guy sitting on the cliff meditating, right? But there also is a part of it where you're dealing with your own personal demons that have been conditioned in there that you have to face because you have nothing else to do but face it,
Hmm. I
right?
did that
Once
for
you get
4 days. I can't imagine a year. Like
it,
4 days was intense. I can't imagine a year.
it changed me.
I'm sure.
What it did is made me become deeply intimate with my own inner struggle and my own belief systems about who I thought I was and all of the conditioning that I received. It gave me the opportunity to assess the conditioning and ask myself, do I really need this? I mean,
Right.
I know this is what I was taught, what I believe, what society says, what my conditioning was, what my family told me, what my culture told me. But do I need this? Is this real? Is this really part of me accessing who I am? And I mean, ultimately, it also helped me write all the books that I'm writing because the foundation of all those books came from the journaling and the unraveling of what I thought I was versus what I really was.
Right. So
And
how many
it was
pounds of that 70 was paper to write on?
one journal.
Wow. You did all that in one journal?
Yeah,
That's
I wrote
impressive.
really small, really small.
And it was a really thick journal.
It
It
was a
was.
really
I have the book. It's like this thick now.
okay.
It started as a thin thing, but I mean, I'd glue stuff in it, and it was really just about kind of
Mhm.
getting a non-judgmental place for me to just really document and understand all the different parts of me, the ego mind, the transcendent mind, the inner child, all the different factions, all the different fragmented aspects of my personality got a voice. And when I could examine that voice and learn from what I was seeing without judgment, putting it all in there and just observing it, I got a very different perspective on what I thought I was versus what I actually was. And that's why I always say journaling is such a powerful tool because it teaches observation. It's a non-judgmental place to pour everything into, and it can be a very powerful way to unravel. Plus, it saves you hundreds of thousands of dollars of therapy. Let's be clear,
Right. Yeah, let's be
right?
honest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if we learned how to, if we did that kind of self-observation, then we wouldn't have to be deeply going into certain systems to kind of figure it out. But then again, on the other side of that, there was a point where I reached that I absolutely know I needed a guide because I had got to as far as I could get with my own inner assessment, and I needed some outside, objective, hopefully refined and masterful assistance to
Right.
be able to unravel stuff because I had reached the point where I couldn't get any further in my own space. And I believe I'm a firm believer of mentorship, and I've always had a mentor. I always will have a mentor for that reason because it keeps you in check and it exposes things that you may not see because you can get deluded by your own ego.
Exactly.
So it was good.
Exactly.
It was a powerful. It was a vision quest, and it was powerful, and it was and I think the longest time I was away from people was I think the longest period was 3 months where I didn't have any access to people, no people at all.
Wow.
But I'm telling you, it was a transformational period. Now, this interesting thing is, in India, what they do with the chelas or the students, when they go and they send them off to the mountains, the guru will send the student off to the mountains to meditate. And part of the journey is at some point, the guru comes back, takes the student and says, okay, and the student's achieved all the state of peace, and you're in this thing, transcended state, because you've been doing all these practices and in isolation. Now the teacher goes, okay, now the next part of this journey is to come back into the village of your birth and you become a beggar in the village of your birth and you sit there and you get to see how much you've actually transcended in terms of your attachments. Because when you're now observing the state where the place and the village where you came from as a beggar, as a sannyasi, as a renunciate, you're there, you now have to face all the conditioning, and then it gives you another state of understanding as how much you learn versus how much you thought you learned.
Right.
And
That's
then
a
the
huge,
process
that can
happens
be a
again.
big gap, right?
It could
It's a
be a big
long
gap.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
But then
Yeah.
again, we're back to that idea of the journey from point A to point B. You could think you're there and you could delude yourself into thinking you're further along than you are, but then you need the opportunity to test and measure where your consciousness is in relation to all the things. All when society comes and starts bombarding you with all the conditioning, you get to see how much you've really, really mastered, how much you've let go, and how much you're still attached. So
Right.
I think that's the beauty of the journey, because it keeps showing you where there's more opportunity for growth and expansion. But I will say this: I don't typically like the word test. Like, we talk
I
about the universe testing us,
I don't like
right?
it either. I'm with you
And
there.
because if you think about who tested you in the past, authority figures, systems, religious systems, that's where your test. And I'm not saying tests are bad, because it proves competency. But I mean, a lot of people's test is wired into the proving, and some outside spiritual authority that's saying, check, you've made the mark and now you're ready to move forward. I would prefer to use the term opportunity, invitation, challenges, like from the universe, rather than tests and lessons, because that feels so much like in school. And if
Yeah.
you think that's imposed, right? So
Right.
I would rather say I'm receiving this invitation from the universe. And I think that languaging can help shift our relationship to struggle too.
Right.
Because if we use the languaging invitation, opportunity, right? A challenge, a gift, that's different than saying it's a test, it's a lesson, it's this thing that I need to achieve. I need to get all the right answers to move forward, which again, we're trying to prove ourselves to some outside authority. I'm not saying everyone believes that, but I invite people to examine it, just because that's part of struggle. That
Right.
whole thing. And you think about it, that's left over. That's left
Right.
over from religious conditioning, that you were
Yeah.
tested by God to earn your right to be in heaven.
Yeah. I know
Seriously.
when I'm working with my students and clients and they're like, "Oh, I'm stuck." So be stuck. Sit with the stuckness.
It was stuckness, right?
Sit with the
What is it teaching
stuckness.
you?
What is it teaching you? And then, well, I got to be doing something. No, you don't, because this is something that you're doing. You're learning to sit with it. And then when it's time to move forward, take the next indicated step. Borrowing from the 12-step programs, take the next indicated step. And I would take that even one degree further and say, take the next inspired step.
Oh, it's beautiful.
You know,
Inspired. And what are
I
you inspired by? Consciousness, by yourself,
exactly,
by what you feel, by your direct experience, by something that's bubbling up from within you, not something that's
exactly.
telling you how you have to move forward.
Yeah,
At the end of the
exactly.
day, you still have to have desire to do what it is that you're doing. It's all about desire. We can give people everything else in the world, but they have to come up with the desire to go through it.
There has
So,
to be something in them that wants
Mhm.
it.
Yeah,
mhm.
They have to want it.
absolutely.
You had some sort of desire to stay for 3 months without contact. You had to have some sort of desire, and you were getting something out of that by doing it. So your own desires propelled you to go through all of that.
I saw the unraveling process happen. And there was a part of me that's like, I need to let this finish, it's finished this cycle. Because if I
Yeah.
prematurely get off the operating table, then I don't get what's being offered by the invitation that I've chosen, accepted, and craved. So
Yep.
there was a point where, at some point, where I knew I was done after a year of being out there. I knew I was done, and I was even resistance to going back. I was like, no, 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 I'm good. I could stay out here in the state. And then I get invitations to show me, no, you're done. You've done this phase of whatever it is that you needed to do.
Hmm.
Have nature heal you, be in this relationship and this intimate level without distractions. You're now at a period where you need to go off the mountain and go back into society and test what's unraveled, and get the next invitation to see what the next state of evolution is going to be. So
Right.
even in that place, there was a point where, if like there was some knowing inside of me that I didn't want to get off the operating table. I was still in it, and until I got to a place where that completed, then I was ready to move forward. Which is no different than staying with a feeling, or staying
Hmm.
with the stuckness, or allowing yourself to be okay with whatever state of consciousness you're in at that state at this point. It's all part of the journey, right? It's
It
when we're in
absolutely, yeah.
resistance to what is, this is where struggle starts to become that thing. And again, society doesn't really give us these tools. These are things we have to learn. And it takes a spiritually matured individual to know the difference between contraction and struggle, and suffering and discomfort, which is required as part of your journey. right? That's why I say comfort and growth are diametrically opposed and mutually exclusive, because eventually if you're seeking comfort, comfort will eventually lead you to complacency, and complacency will create more suffering, not less suffering.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
But you're right, Bobby. When I saw what was happening, when I had to be able to be aware enough to acknowledge there is something profound going on here, and I'm not really doing it. I just need to be with it and allow it to work itself out. I put myself in this, I was inspired to have this experience. I now need to stay with the experience and let it teach me what it needs to teach me.
Right. And when
And
you're
then it
done
became,
with when that comes to an end, you know it.
oh, you know it,
You
trust
know
me.
it. You just
And I
know,
didn't
you
want,
know.
yeah. And then I became attached to that. To be
Yeah.
honest with you, I became attached to being out there, and the universe was like, no, no, no,
Oh,
you're
solitude is
done.
addictive. Solitude is addictive because there's no drama in solitude. You know, like all the drama that I have in solitude all happens between my own two ears. So, that's where that is. Yeah, we can you believe that it's already 12:30. We have already like this is awesome. Um, Thank you both for an incredible discussion. It's just been a great discussion. And Marcus, would you like to give us some dates? When are you coming back
Yeah,
to the Midwest?
I'm going to be back in the Midwest the 23rd of January to February 4th. There's private sessions, in-person sessions. I think we have about, I think there's about at least 8 or 9 events, guided meditations, pranayamas. There's a lecture on Kundalini. It's the year of the snake, so there's going to be a lot of energy around Kundalini and around. We're doing this whole thing on masculine and feminine and Racine. And Kamala, who owns Verite, hosts this beautiful space. So that's always a really beautiful thing. So please come out and join. I'll be there for a couple of weeks doing my thing and kind of engaging in them with the Midwest folks. I mean, listen, I love it coming back there because there's a nostalgia because it reminds me of a lot of the Canadian culture. As much as I love being in Sedona, don't get me wrong, I love it here. But coming back to the Midwest is always a touch point and kind of a reminder of my roots to a certain degree.
Yeah, hey.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
there,
ain't no
hey.
doubt.
So
Okie
y'all
dokie.
can, y'all can find Marcus on marcuskasunich.com. I hope you take the time to go out there and take a look at all of his events and sign up for something. They are marvelous. Uh, I can't say enough about, I've been to pretty much of most of what he's got out there, and they are certainly educational. They're relaxing. You will find yourself a little bit more if you have the desire to do that. Anyway, marcuskasunich.com. Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate your company and your attention. Have a great day.
All right, thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.